She entered the marriage believing trust was something that grew stronger with time and shared silence. Her life had been built on calm routines, mutual respect, and the quiet confidence of chosen partnership. Friends saw them as balanced, elegant, and emotionally mature, a couple untouched by unnecessary drama. She never raised her voice, never demanded control, and never imagined betrayal inside her own home. For her, love meant stability, not suspicion, and communication meant honesty without constant defense. That belief made her gentle, but it also made her dangerously unprepared for deliberate manipulation. The lie did not arrive loudly, nor did it look like an obvious threat to their shared reality. It entered through a comment, a suggestion, a seed planted by someone who smiled convincingly. At first, it sounded harmless, almost protective, disguised as concern rather than accusation. She never noticed the moment truth stopped being the strongest voice in her marriage. The lie grew slowly, shaped by selective details and carefully framed misunderstandings that felt believable. A message taken out of context, a story told halfway, and silence added where clarity was needed. Her husband listened without questioning motives, trusting the storyteller more than shared history. Doubt replaced certainty, and distance quietly took the place of affection and emotional safety. He started observing her differently, searching for confirmation instead of remembering who she was. She felt the change immediately, sensing coldness without knowing the crime she was accused of. Questions were replaced by assumptions, and conversations ended before they truly began. She tried to explain, unaware of the full accusation forming behind closed doors. Every word she spoke felt weaker against a narrative already decided without her presence. The marriage shifted, not through conflict, but through invisible judgment she could not fight. Soon, respect eroded into suspicion, and intimacy turned into guarded politeness and emotional restraint. Her husband stopped sharing his thoughts, convinced silence was safer than confronting uncertainty directly. She felt isolated beside him, sharing a home that no longer felt emotionally accessible. Family gatherings became uncomfortable, filled with glances that carried unspoken conclusions. She noticed people listening less, watching more, as if she needed constant explanation. The lie had already left the marriage and begun reshaping her reputation externally. No one asked her side with genuine openness, only with expectation of confirmation. She began doubting whether defending herself was even possible without knowing the full accusation. The injustice felt suffocating because she was fighting an enemy she could not see. That was when pain stopped being confusion and became something heavier and more personal. One night, she realized love was no longer protecting her, but standing silently against her. The man who once trusted her completely now looked at her with quiet disappointment. She searched her memory endlessly, trying to locate a mistake that never existed. Her dignity remained intact, but her emotional ground was collapsing without explanation or fairness. She understood then that truth alone was not enough when belief had already shifted. The lie had not needed proof, only timing, influence, and her inability to defend herself. She felt grief not only for the marriage, but for the safety she thought it guaranteed. That moment marked the beginning of emotional separation, long before any official ending. She stayed silent, not because she was guilty, but because words had lost their power. And within that silence, the first fracture of a queen quietly began to form. She woke up each morning beside a man who felt further away than strangers on crowded streets. The house remained the same, yet every room carried tension that refused to be named aloud. Her husband avoided eye contact, conversations shortened, and warmth disappeared without explanation. She sensed judgment replacing curiosity, as if a verdict had already been reached internally. Every attempt to reconnect felt intrusive, as though she was forcing intimacy where trust had died. She did not know what evidence existed, only that something had poisoned his certainty about her. The silence between them became heavier than any argument they had ever shared. She began walking carefully through her own home, afraid of triggering invisible accusations. Love did not end suddenly. It withered slowly under suspicion she could not confront. That quiet rejection cut deeper than anger ever could. Outside their home, the lie continued spreading with surprising efficiency and subtle cruelty. Family members spoke politely, yet their tone carried unmistakable distance and restrained judgment. Invitations stopped coming, calls grew shorter, and concern felt rehearsed rather than sincere. She noticed how conversations paused when she entered rooms, then resumed awkwardly afterward. No one accused her directly, yet everyone seemed informed of something she had never heard. The humiliation was public, but the explanation remained painfully private and inaccessible. She realized reputations could be dismantled without confrontation, simply through implication and silence. Defending herself felt impossible when no one openly stated the charge against her character. Each interaction became an exercise in emotional endurance and controlled composure. She learned that shame spreads faster than truth when people prefer comfort over clarity. Eventually, the confrontation came, but not as a conversation, only as a cold conclusion. Her husband spoke carefully, choosing words that avoided specifics but confirmed lost trust. He told her he believed something had happened, something he could not ignore anymore. She asked what, when, how, and with whom, yet answers stayed vague and guarded. It was clear he no longer needed details, only confirmation of his belief. Her denial sounded desperate against a narrative already accepted as fact. He said distance was necessary, space unavoidable, and separation the healthiest choice. She listened without interruption, realizing defense would only deepen his conviction. That moment ended the marriage emotionally, even before legal words were spoken. She walked away carrying confusion heavier than any argument they could have had. The official separation followed quickly, wrapped in polite language and irreversible decisions. She packed her belongings quietly, aware that dignity was her last remaining protection. There were no dramatic scenes, only resignation masked as maturity and mutual understanding. Friends praised their calm handling of the situation, unaware of the injustice beneath it. She signed papers feeling detached, as though witnessing someone else's life dissolve. The lie had succeeded completely, dismantling her world without ever revealing itself. She lost not only her marriage, but her voice within the story told about her. Every door that closed reminded her how little truth mattered once trust collapsed. She stepped into a smaller life, stripped of certainty, comfort, and belonging. That was when pain turned into something sharper than grief: isolation. Alone, she confronted nights filled with unanswered questions and relentless self-examination. She replayed memories obsessively, searching for moments that could justify suspicion. Nothing fit, nothing explained the certainty with which she had been judged. The injustice was unbearable precisely because it lacked a visible enemy. She mourned the version of herself that believed integrity was always enough. Her confidence fractured as she wondered how easily she had been erased. She stopped reaching out, understanding explanations were no longer welcome. Silence became her shield, protecting what little pride remained intact. In that solitude, she recognized the end was not just a divorce. It was the collapse of the life she had trusted most. The days after the separation blurred together, marked by routines that felt foreign and stripped of meaning. She moved into a smaller space, carrying boxes that represented fragments of a former identity. The silence there was different, no longer tense, but painfully empty and indifferent. She no longer had to measure her words, yet there was no one left to hear them. Financial adjustments followed quickly, forcing her to confront vulnerability she never anticipated. Comfort became a memory, replaced by careful budgeting and restrained expectations. She noticed how easily stability vanished once social support quietly disappeared. People who once admired her success now offered polite distance instead of help. Her fall was not dramatic, but methodical, removing layers of security one by one. That slow unraveling felt crueler than any sudden collapse could have been. Work became her refuge, though even there whispers followed her presence. Colleagues treated her professionally, yet curiosity lingered behind controlled expressions. She sensed questions forming that no one dared ask directly to her face. Productivity replaced emotion, becoming her way of surviving each demanding day. She avoided personal conversations, fearing her story had already been rewritten elsewhere. The lie continued shaping perceptions she could not correct or influence. She learned that absence of proof never protects someone from quiet assumptions. Every achievement felt smaller without acknowledgement or shared pride. She worked harder, not to succeed, but to remain invisible and unchallenged. Her ambition narrowed into simple endurance rather than growth or recognition. Nights were the hardest, when distraction failed and thoughts returned without mercy. She questioned her worth, her judgment, and her faith in people she once trusted. Sleep came late, interrupted by memories that offered no clarity or resolution. She wondered how easily love could be dismantled by certainty built on nothing. Her confidence eroded as she replayed conversations, searching for missed warnings. Blame shifted inward, despite knowing logic did not support self-condemnation. The lack of closure became a wound that refused to heal naturally. She felt smaller, quieter, and less deserving of the life she once lived. Pain settled into her routine, familiar but still exhausting to carry. This was not grief anymore. It was a steady descent into emotional exhaustion. At her lowest point, she stopped expecting fairness from anyone around her. Hope felt dangerous, capable of reopening wounds she struggled to contain. She accepted the narrative imposed on her simply to preserve energy. Defending herself no longer seemed worth the emotional cost or humiliation. Her world had shrunk to survival, routine, and controlled isolation. She realized falling did not require failure, only disbelief from the wrong person. The lie had taken more than her marriage. It had dismantled her sense of place. She existed quietly, unseen, carrying strength she no longer recognized. That acceptance marked the true bottom of her descent. Only after reaching it could anything begin to change. Something shifted the moment she stopped trying to be understood by people who never listened. The exhaustion of constant self-defense gave way to a quieter, unfamiliar kind of clarity. She realized survival did not require approval, only discipline and emotional containment. For the first time since everything collapsed, she focused inward instead of outward. Pain no longer demanded explanations. It demanded structure, routine, and personal boundaries. She began rebuilding her days with intention, even when motivation felt distant. Small habits replaced emotional chaos, offering control where life had taken everything else. She stopped asking why the lie worked and started asking how she would endure it. That decision did not bring relief, but it brought direction and mental stability. Silence became a tool, not a weakness. She limited her world deliberately, choosing solitude over spaces filled with judgment. Social invitations were declined without excuses or emotional negotiation. She protected her energy carefully, understanding how fragile it had become. Books replaced conversations, learning replaced self-blame, and observation replaced reaction. She noticed patterns she had ignored before, especially in how people benefited from her fall. Details once dismissed as irrelevant now demanded her attention. Contradictions surfaced quietly, hidden in careless remarks and shifting stories. The lie was no longer invisible. It was simply patient and well protected. She did not confront it. Understanding exposure required timing, not impulse. For the first time, she sensed that truth was not gone, only waiting. Her posture changed subtly, though no one around her noticed immediately. She walked with more control, spoke less, and listened with precision. Emotional reactions gave way to calculated restraint, and deliberate responses. She no longer corrected assumptions or clarified misunderstandings. Letting others believe what they wanted became a form of power. She learned that dignity does not argue, it observes and remembers. Each interaction became information rather than emotional engagement. She stopped bleeding in public and reserved vulnerability for private reflection. Strength returned quietly, without celebration or external recognition. Transformation had begun without anyone announcing it. In that silence, she accepted a truth far more uncomfortable than betrayal. Not everyone who witnessed injustice felt obligated to stop it. Some preferred the comfort of a lie over the disruption of accountability. She stopped hoping people would do the right thing voluntarily. Instead, she prepared herself to stand unshaken when reality finally surfaced. Her focus shifted from repairing the past to mastering her present. Pain was no longer an enemy, but a teacher sharpening her awareness. The fall had stripped her of illusions she would never carry again. She was no longer waiting to be rescued or redeemed by others. She was becoming someone who could not be erased twice. She began rebuilding her life without announcing change or seeking validation from anyone watching. Mornings started earlier, structured by discipline rather than emotional exhaustion or lingering regret. Her focus shifted toward competence, stability, and reclaiming control over her own direction. She invested in skills, knowledge, and opportunities that did not depend on approval. Every improvement was quiet, intentional, and entirely hers to own. She understood that real growth did not require witnesses or public acknowledgement. Confidence returned slowly, shaped by consistency rather than emotional reassurance. She no longer measured progress by how others perceived her recovery. Each small victory strengthened something deeper than reputation: self-respect. That foundation became stronger than anything the lie had ever touched. She rebuilt her career with strategic patience and long-term vision. Opportunities appeared once she stopped shrinking to accommodate doubt or gossip. People noticed her professionalism, clarity, and calm authority without knowing her history. She spoke less about her past and more through results and quiet competence. Respect followed naturally, unforced, and free from emotional negotiation. She realized power did not announce itself. It revealed itself through consistency. Where she once sought understanding, she now offered excellence. Her presence changed rooms without demanding attention or explanation. Those who underestimated her no longer mattered to her progress. She was no longer rebuilding a life, she was designing one. Emotionally, she became selective, guarding access to her thoughts and experiences. Trust was no longer given freely, but earned through patterns, not promises. She learned to observe actions without romanticizing intentions. Boundaries replaced fear, and clarity replaced blind optimism. She no longer felt the need to explain her silence or distance. People either respected her limits or revealed their irrelevance. This control brought peace she had never experienced before. She was no longer reactive, no longer seeking reassurance from fragile bonds. Strength settled into her posture, her voice, and her choices. Transformation was no longer theoretical. It was visible in how she lived. She did not chase justice, vengeance, or recognition for what she had endured. Instead, she focused on becoming untouchable by the same forces that once broke her. The lie began losing power simply because she no longer carried its weight. Her name surfaced again, this time associated with competence rather than controversy. People adjusted their tone around her without understanding why. She did not correct them, knowing time would handle the rest. Truth does not need urgency when patience is on its side. She was no longer a victim waiting for redemption. She was a woman reconstructing herself beyond anyone's expectations, and the queen was no longer forming in pain, but in control. Subtle cracks began appearing in the story that had once seemed unquestionable to everyone else. Casual remarks no longer aligned, timelines shifted, and explanations grew unnecessarily complicated. People who repeated the lie struggled to keep details consistent under casual scrutiny. What once sounded convincing now required effort to maintain and defend. She noticed these changes without reacting, storing each inconsistency quietly. Truth was not fighting back, it was letting the lie collapse under its own weight. She understood that exposure rarely comes from confrontation, but from repetition under pressure. The more the lie circulated, the more fragile it became. She remained distant, composed, and uninterested in correcting narratives prematurely. Patience became her most strategic form of power. Her ex-husband began noticing discomfort where certainty once lived comfortably. Questions surfaced privately, followed by moments of hesitation he could not explain. The confidence with which he had judged her started dissolving into doubt. He revisited old conversations, messages, and decisions with new uncertainty. What once felt obvious now felt rushed, incomplete, and poorly examined. He realized he had trusted voices that benefited from division rather than truth. Regret emerged quietly, without apology or courage to reach out. She sensed the shift from a distance, without satisfaction or emotional reaction. The power dynamic had already changed, even before truth was spoken aloud. She no longer needed acknowledgement to feel vindicated. Others began adjusting their behavior toward her without openly addressing the past. Tone softened, curiosity replaced judgment, and respect returned cautiously. People sensed they had misjudged something, but lacked the courage to admit it directly. She allowed the discomfort to exist, refusing to offer emotional relief. Her silence forced others to confront their own assumptions internally. She understood accountability begins where excuses are no longer provided. The lie was losing allies, not because of confrontation, but because of fatigue. Maintaining false certainty had become emotionally expensive. Truth, in contrast, required nothing but time and consistency. She continued forward, untouched by the shifting opinions around her. By the time evidence surfaced naturally, she no longer needed it to feel whole. Messages resurfaced, testimonies aligned, and contradictions became undeniable. The person who created the lie began isolating themselves through defensive behavior. The narrative reversed direction without her involvement or request. She watched calmly, understanding the moment no longer belonged to pain. Justice was approaching, but she had already outgrown the need for it. Her identity no longer depended on anyone's recognition or regret. She had rebuilt herself beyond the damage caused by deception. The truth was returning, but it was meeting someone entirely transformed. And what followed would not be restoration, but elevation. The truth surfaced without ceremony, announced not by her voice, but by undeniable alignment of facts. What once lived in whispers now stood openly, supported by messages, timelines, and reluctant confessions. The lie collapsed publicly, stripped of its confidence and exposed by its own contradictions. Those who repeated it fell silent, unsure how to rewrite a narrative they once defended. No apology came immediately, only shock and discomfort where certainty had lived. She observed calmly, understanding that truth does not seek permission to exist. The exposure felt distant to her, almost anticlimactic after everything she had endured. Justice rarely arrives with drama. It arrives with inevitability. The moment belonged to reality, not to emotion. She remained composed, untouched by the chaos unfolding around her. Her ex-husband finally reached out, burdened by clarity that arrived far too late. His words carried regret, confusion, and the weight of irreversible decisions. He admitted doubt, then error, then responsibility he could no longer escape. She listened without interruption, without satisfaction, and without emotional reaction. The apology sought relief more than forgiveness, and she recognized the difference immediately. What he wanted was restoration of his own peace, not repair of what he destroyed. She offered acknowledgement without reopening wounds or revisiting explanations. Some truths arrive after the consequences have already been sealed. She did not reject him with anger, only with finality. Closure did not require reconciliation. Public perception shifted decisively, though no one addressed it directly. Respect returned in careful gestures, altered tones, and unspoken recognition. People avoided eye contact, burdened by the awareness of their silence. She accepted none of it personally, knowing reputation restored never equals trust earned. Their discomfort was not her responsibility to soothe or correct. She had paid the cost of their certainty already. Justice does not demand participation from those who survived injustice. She allowed distance to remain, protecting what she had rebuilt. The world adjusted around her new position without invitation. She moved forward without waiting for permission. In the end, the truth did not give her back what was taken. It gave her something far more permanent and untouchable. She no longer belonged to the version of herself that needed belief from others. Her identity stood independent of marriage, validation, or explanation. She did not reclaim her past. She surpassed it completely. The lie had destroyed a marriage, but it had built a queen. She walked away without resentment, apology, or nostalgia. Her presence carried authority earned through survival and transformation. Justice was complete, not because others suffered, but because she rose, and nothing could ever take that from her again.